WFYI Podcasts, brought to you by Bloomington, home to the Indiana Hoosiers and over 200,000 acres of fall foliage in the Hoosier National Forest. Indulge in seasonal flavors at the Elm, experience breathtaking views atop 4 fire towers, or catch a Big Ten football game at Memorial Stadium. More, including how to plan your fall getaway, at visitbloomington.com.
We're going to take a trip right now. Like we always do about this time.
This is a journey into sound. Break it down.
I'm Kyle Long, and you're listening to Cultural Manifesto. Up first, on this week's show, I'll be joined by music journalists Ann Powers and Allison Finsterstock. We'll discuss the new book, How Women Made Music, A Revolutionary History from NPR Music.
My long life as a journalist has been not only, but largely invested in this project. I've been writing about women in music and even being told that's not a valid term, etc., since I was in my teens or early 20s.
Women have played an essential role in shaping American popular music. From vocalist Bessie Smith, who played an enormous role in popularizing blues music, to gospel star Sister Rosetta Tharpe, who laid the groundwork for the development of rock and roll. But for far too long, the contributions of women have been undervalued or completely omitted from mainstream narratives of music history. A new book from NPR Music aims to set the record straight. It's titled How Women Made Music, A Revolutionary History from NPR Music. I recently spoke with the book's editor, Allison Finsterstock, and the award-winning music journalist, Ann Powers, who wrote the book's foreword. How Women Made Music features a collection of essays and archival interviews drawn from 50-plus years of NPR reporting. Let's join my conversation with Allison Finsterstock and Ann Powers. Ann and Allison, thank you so much for taking time to speak with me today.
Thank you so much for talking with us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This is Allison.
Ann, I understand this book grew out of the NPR series, Turning the Tables. Can you tell us a bit about the origin of How Women Made Music?
Well, we do have an origin story, a kind of a Big Bang story. Allison and our co-founder, Jill Sternheimer, and I were at a show in New Orleans. We were watching the great left-handed electric guitar player, Barbara Lynn, at a festival down there. We walked away from the show and we realized kind of all at once that, wow, Barbara Lynn is so great, and yet she's never on lists of like the greatest guitar players or the most innovative guitar players. You never see her name, very rarely. And that conversation expanded into, we all love Rickie Lee Jones, and yet how often does she make these lists of the best, even the best singer-songwriters, and she fully deserves it. And that led to us saying, well, no one can deny Aretha Franklin, and yet when we see a list of the 100 best albums or greatest artists of 20th century, Aretha is rarely, if ever, at number one, because that number one spot is always reserved for Bob Dylan or the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, So that just led us down a road of trying to think of what could we do? What could we do to not only celebrate the excellence of women artists and the centrality of women artists, but to really make sure that people understand that there is not a parallel history, but a central history of women making music. And you can tell the entirety of popular music history only through the stories of women. This is not to be discriminatory against men. Some of my best friends are men, but I think we were all ready to see what would happen if we did really focus solely on the women. And that is how our first season was born in 2017.
Allison, I really appreciated the broad spectrum of musicians featured in this book. I was surprised to see one of the first photos in the book was a picture of Lydia Mendoza, the great Mexican-American singer and guitarist. That really sets the tone for the depth of music covered in this book, which includes Mahalia Jackson, Missy Elliott, Gal Costa, Marian Anderson, Celia Cruz, Lizzo, Bessie Smith, Patti Smith, Lauryn Hill, Loretta Lynn, The Raincoats, Alice Coltrane, Mother Maybelle Carter, Beyonce, PJ Harvey, and so many others. Can you tell us a bit about the musicians you chose to focus on in this book? And are there particular characteristics you were looking for that these artists share?
Well, I mean, I think we cover almost more than 100 years of recorded music history in the end, because the initial Turning the Tables list started at the album era, in 1964, the beginning of the recorded album era, and went all the way up until the present day, which then was 2017. And then we focused one year on women who had begun recording in the 21st century, who were going to kind of define the time period we were just heading into right then. And then we went back in time and picked 8 foremothers, the women who shaped popular music history, people from before the rock era, like Bessie Smith, Marian Anderson, Mary Lou Williams, Celia Cruz. So there was not really like a criteria for admission. It was more like we had this like surfeit of material. It was such a rich world. And there are many people in here who are huge stars. Not everyone is sort of an unsung hero. Taylor Swift is in here, and Beyonce is in here, and Bessie Smith is in here. But it is, like Anne was saying, kind of a secret history or an alternate history that was sort of right there all along. It's not hidden. It's not something that no one knew about. It's just the idea was to shift our focus a little bit and illuminate all of these artists that had always been deeply influential in what we think of as sort of like the canon of popular music, and just reveal what they were there for.
It's important to say, Kyle, that we, Allison and I, or even the core team behind Turning the Tables and How Women Made Music, we were not the ones who made all these decisions. We had a huge group of advisors, contributors, editors, writers, artists were involved, presenters. So a lot of the material, almost all the material you see in this really came from this massive conversation, as we were talking about before. And then Allison's brilliant work editing the book, bringing in excerpts from artist interviews from more than 50 years of NPR's coverage of women artists. That just increased the number. So, I mean, if a book can be multi-authored, if it can be a kind of Bible, not to put too fine a point on it, this is that.
Or a Talmud.
Or a Talmud.
But
yeah,
it was. It's absolutely. This was a democratic process, turning the tables the whole way. There were, I think, the initial voting body was more than 50.
Yeah, I think it was more like 75 almost.
Yeah, like people who worked in public radio and music writers from all around the country, just like arguing and nominating and suggesting and celebrating back and forth. And then that was the material that I was able to draw from to assemble the book.
Yeah. Yeah, and then in subsequent seasons, we had advisors that were all scholars and academics from universities around the country. Another year, we had young writers, many of whom have gone on to top jobs, people like Lindsay Zoladz and Amanda Petrusich. So really, we tried to touch on every corner of music writing as well as music history.
Anne and Allison, I think the importance of this book, How Women Made Music, is underscored by a book that was published last year. In 2023, Jan Wenner, the founder of Rolling Stone magazine, published an anthology of interviews with rock musicians titled The Masters. That book exclusively featured interviews with white male musicians. And during an interview with the New York Times, Jan was asked why his book did not include interviews with women or black musicians. And he said those musicians weren't articulate enough on an intellectual level. I'm curious what your thoughts are on Jan Wenner's book and the controversy that was sparked by his comments.
Well, he would find this book totally uninteresting, apparently. It's full of inarticulate people. I'm sorry.
Yes, as Allison said. Well, first, we see what happened immediately after Jan Wenner did that interview. And David Marchese, who did the interview, is a master in the New York Times, is a master at, getting people to cross the line from their kind of planned statements into the kind of heart of their psyches, right? So it wasn't a pretty picture. I have to say what was extraordinary about that moment was that social media completely lit up with women and people of color telling their stories of how they had bad experiences at Rolling Stone, but also stories of women who had worked at Rolling Stone and these secret histories of the staff of Rolling Stone, especially in the early 70s. There were a lot of women who worked there and they never, really got their due, rarely got their due. Jessica Hopper actually did an oral history of the women at Rolling Stone a few years back. But so that's one thing. One thing is, obviously, Jan Wenner was living in the past in that moment, because immediately his words were batted back, But I think it does show the struggles that women artists, women journalists, women, who would love to be working in the studio as producers or engineers or on the road as tour managers or roadies, women who try to excel in these environments are facing this, to our minds, ridiculous, but so deeply seated prejudice that it has taken 50 years plus more of directly confronting this prejudice to get to a point where, we can kind of immediately recover from such an act or such a moment as the Jan Wenner moment. I mean, my long life as a journalist has been not only, but largely invested in this project. I've been writing about women in music and even being told that's not a valid term, et cetera, since I was in my teens or early 20s. And I'm definitely at midlife now. So it's been a long time project for me, always in collaboration with other women. And I've seen these moments where it seems like there's a breakthrough and then we fall back. Seems like it's a breakthrough and then we fall back. But I do feel in 2024, this feels like a paradigm shift, a sea change. And I hope that that's true.
And I think already, just a very quick add to that, none of the men interviewed in that book would deny the tremendous influence that women artists had on them. I mean, they had already been in the press talking about it for decades.
Yes.
Mick Jagger's was starstruck by Ronnie Spector and Irma Thomas in the 60s. They were tremendous influences.
Yeah,
so
yeah. Bob Dylan wrote, I don't know if Bob Dylan's in that book. Sorry, Jan, I haven't read your book. But but I'll say Dylan wrote his famous album Blood on the Tracks, largely inspired by the #1 record in our first season, Joni Mitchell's Blue. That's why it's called Tangled Up in Blue, friends. So just saying.
Ann and Allison, thank you so much for taking time to talk about the book. Any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners in Indianapolis?
Well, I just want to say that my dream reader for this is anyone who cares about music, any whatever gender you identify with or as a non-binary person. But maybe if I had to specify a dream reader, it would be a young person who, like me, is trying to discover what music is. And like me, picks up a volume. Now, the volume I picked up was the Rolling Stone Illustrated History of Rock and Roll, which had some women writers, had some women artists, but was vastly defined by male artists. So I love to think of this in the hands of, a 14-year-old, and what a world they are entering into.
Ann and Allison, thank you for taking a few minutes to talk with me today.
Thanks so much, Kyle.
Thank you.
How Women Made Music, a revolutionary history from NPR Music, is in bookstores now. That's all the time we have for this week. Check out the Cultural Manifesto podcast at WFYI.org or wherever you listen to podcasts. Cultural Manifesto is hosted and produced by me, Kyle Long. Thank you for listening.
WFYI Podcasts, brought to you by Bloomington, home to the Indiana Hoosiers and over 200,000 acres of fall foliage in the Hoosier National Forest. Indulge in seasonal flavors at the Elm, experience breathtaking views atop 4 fire towers, or catch a Big Ten football game at Memorial Stadium. More, including how to plan your fall getaway, at visitbloomington.com.